But Americans at the moment are gathering to remember Jimmy Carter as a nearly week-long state funeral gets underway for the 39th president. We had a procession yesterday from Carter's home in Plains in Georgia all the way to Atlanta, beginning the six-day public goodbye for Jimmy Carter, who passed away last month now, aged 100. And we know that on Tuesday as well, the body will be flown to Washington, D.C., where he will then lie in state in the Capitol before a service on Thursday that will feature remarks from former American presidents. Let's speak now with Rich Rubino, who is a political analyst and presidential historian. Rich, thank you very much for joining us. Clearly a lot of love then for Jimmy Carter, and the oldest former president, the only president to reach 100 years old.
Yes, and it's very interesting because when he was president, he was not particularly popular. He came in at a time of stagflation, which is supposed to be unheard of, where you have increasing unemployment coupled with increasing inflation. But he did do a lot to try to mitigate that. He put Paul Volcker in charge of the Federal Reserve, who had a tight money policy, which actually hurt Jimmy Carter during his presidency. And actually, for beginning of Reagan's administration, who came after Jimmy Carter, there was a bit of a recession. But eventually, the economy started to come around. Reagan got a lot of credit for it in 83, 84. But he's very much, I think, he's kind of a misunderstood person, because today a lot of people think of him as a liberal. But during his time, he was a lot more conservative. He supported deregulation. He wanted tax cuts. He wanted to balance the budget by 1981. Most members of his own party wanted a continuation of Great Society liberalism of Lyndon Johnson. And it was really kind of a war in his party, internecine conflict. And in 1980, he actually had two major challengers for his own party's nomination, if you can believe it. Jerry Brown, who was governor of California at the time, and Ted Kennedy, senator from Massachusetts, came this close to actually upending him. But today, a lot of people think of him as a lot more liberal than he actually was.
Yeah, and is it referred to as sort of Dixiecrats, Democrats who are from the south of the country, who have slightly different politics? He's
a lot different than that, though. A Dixiecrat actually goes back to 1948. And at the Democratic National Committee in Philadelphia that year, when Hubert Humphrey, who former future vice president, was mayor of Minneapolis, he supported a civil rights platform, and it barely got in the Democratic Party's platform. And as a result, many Democrats, these were segregationists who left the Democratic Party and formed their own party called the Dixiecrat Party, or the National Democratic Party, and they nominated then governor of South Carolina, Strom Thurmond. But that was different. Those were Democrats that were outright segregationist. Southern Democrats in the late 1970s were not segregationists, but they were simply more fiscally conservative, and they were a little bit more socially conservative. Bill Clinton, who became president in 1993, was also somebody who was more of a centrist Democrat, but certainly not a segregationist.
Got it. In terms of Jimmy Carter as well, I mean, will he go down as probably the most popular ex-president ever? Because it was what he did out of office when he was with sort of the Carter Center, wasn't it? That really obviously he many people would argue did good work as president, but in terms of what he did afterwards, he was extremely popular.
Yes, absolutely. It wasn't that he was popular. He actually had a lot of critics in the right, in part because they saw him as meddling in U.S. foreign policies. He took positions sometimes that were unpopular in the United States, for example, calling the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank apartheid, for example, going to North Korea and negotiating with North Korea, going to Haiti, for example, and when on the Clinton administration actually sent him there, and he actually saved a lot of lives because him and Sam Nunn and Colin Powell went over there and they negotiated General Raul Cedras, the autocratic dictator who took over illegally, probably in Haiti, arranged for him to leave, to leave quietly and to leave voluntarily, and bring back President John Bertrand Aristide, avoiding an invasion over there. I think if you look, though, at former presidents, there are probably a few that stand out. You have John Quincy Adams, who went back to the United States House of Representatives and became an unreserved opponent of slavery. Then you look at someone like William Howard Taft, for example. William Howard Taft became what he always wanted to be, a Supreme Court justice, and actually became Chief Justice of the United States. Herbert Hoover doing a lot of humanitarian work and working to working on behalf of trying to reauthorize certain government programs, and Bill Clinton, who started the Clinton Center and the Clinton Library, who also does a lot of similar things that Jimmy Carter did.
And let's look ahead to Tuesday, because obviously it will be a day where many people will obviously mourn Jimmy Carter, but also people will celebrate his life. And that's certainly how it's been portrayed as well. And we know that many ex-presidents will be involved. Also, Joe Biden is giving the eulogy.
Yes, Joe Biden was actually, he has a very interesting history with Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter was probably one of the most obscure people ever to become president. In 1974, late 1974, 2 years before he won the Democratic presidential nomination, there was a poll of the potential 35 potential candidates for the Democratic nomination in 1976. You had folks like Senator Scoop Jackson from Washington, Fred Harris from Oklahoma, Birch Bayh from Indiana. Jimmy Carter was so obscure that his name did not even appear. So by late 1975, early 1976, he did a lot of spade work, going to Iowa, which holds the first caucus, New Hampshire, which holds the first primary, and outside of Georgia, the first major endorsement he got was a young freshman senator named Joe Biden from Delaware, who really kind of legitimized Jimmy Carter in terms of the Democratic establishment. Carter went on to win the nomination, win the presidency, barely over a Republican president, Gerald Ford. And as a result, one of his most close coefficients or friends was in really business partners, if you will, on his agenda when he had opposition from the liberal wing of the Democratic Party was a more moderate Joe Biden. So consequently, in 2023, Jimmy Carter asked Joe Biden to deliver the eulogy, and Joe Biden only has about 10 days left in the White House, is still president, and he will indeed deliver the eulogy, as, by the way, interestingly, will the son of President Ford. And President Ford and Jimmy Carter ran against each other in 1976, but when they were going to the funeral of Anwar Sadat in Egypt in 1981, they became very fast friends, and consequently, Gerald Ford delivered the eulogy, or Jimmy Carter delivered the eulogy back in 2006 at Gerald Ford's funeral, and Gerald Ford's son will be at this funeral, and he will be one of the people who will deliver a speech at the funeral as well.
Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Rich Rubino is a political analyst and presidential historian, as we were talking about. Jimmy Carter's funeral has, the 6 days of it has begun. There was a motorcade through Georgia yesterday, and then on Tuesday, Carter will be flown to Washington, D.C., and the service will be on Thursday.